What's up, guys? Welcome back to Talkin Hawkins. Welcome back to Project Potter. My name is Kyle, your host. It's the first time here. Thanks for checking out the channel. Go check out the other content, of course. If you guys are returning viewers, welcome back, guys. This is our Stranger Things in review, season 2, episode 5, guys. So we're making our way through. If you haven't seen the show before, what I do is go through my favorite thoughts on the episode, the Hawkins hero, which is my favorite character, and Mouth Breather, which is my least favorite character, and a score out of 10, guys. So jumping into season 2, episode 5, guys, I feel like all of the complaints I had last episode about it being a filler episode, about the music not being good, the character arc not being good, the drama not being good, the horror not being good. It's almost like they were personally listening to me, right? Because everything was corrected for this one. It's really, really nice. And this is a return to form, I think, for Stranger Things as a whole. So everything worked for me in this episode. The Jonathan and Nancy stuff, how they talk about it being deja vu, and he's like, I want the lights off. They have like a cute moment where they put their cut hands together, and she's like, mine's bigger. And she stares at Jonathan. She's like, what happened to us? And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, what happened, everything that happened, and then we just kind of went our separate ways. She's kind of like, why aren't we together? She said, like, I waited, and Jonathan's like, yeah, for like a month. And she's like, oh, okay, I want the lights off. They go to see Murray Bauman, who is great, and we haven't seen him, I think, since the first episode. And he's like in a door. He's like, look up at the camera. He's like, no, idiot, it's not the speakerphone. He's like, at the camera. He's got like a keep out spray painted. And he's like, yeah, don't worry, I figured it all out. He's like, over 200 tips. And they look over and they're like, that's 11. She's not Russian, and your timeline's wrong, Barb. And he's like, whoa. And they're like, you're going to want to sit down for this, okay? So it's funny because Murray thinks she's like got it all figured out. And then they're like, dude, you close, but like this is all wrong. And then like they just explain to him what's going on. There's a great scene where he's going through the vodka, and they're like, what are you're drinking with vodka or whatever? And he's like, I'm thinking, okay. And they're like, oh, come on, the music too. And he's like, look, it helps me, okay. And then he puts it on, and then they find out that they have to water down. So like they're like, hey, we have this recording. The scientists being like, hey, we didn't mean to do this, but like we can't spread the truth. They're like, no one's going to believe this. And he's like, the second that anyone in authority says this is bullshit, all the heads are going to nod. And it's like a really, really nice scene where they're like, okay, so we water it down. And he's like, yeah, Barb is there, but she got a leak from the toxic plant or whatever. They're like, oh, it's realistic, but it's scary, but it's realistic, or it's grounded. And I really, really like all that stuff, guys. That worked for me. 11 going to see her mom, and then going through the different lights, and then they're like, oh, it's just faulty wiring in the house. And she's like, no, it's not. And we know it's not. It reminds me of the Joyce thing from season 1 where Will's speaking with her through the lights. 11 goes down there. She puts on the blindfold, and she turns to the TV, and she's like, Mama wants to talk. And the sister or whatever must be like, dude, what is happening right now? Like the TV starts going. We find out this tragic story about how the things she's been saying haven't just been random words and stuff. It's because she talks about how she's like stuck in this nightmare. And she's like, is it a good nightmare and a bad one? She's like, I hope a good one. It's really sad. But then we get 11 tapping into her mom and finding out that, she had the baby. She saw them take 11 out, and then she saw Papa there, and then they injected her and then like sent her away. And they're like, oh, the baby died in childbirth. And she's like, no, I saw the baby. And they're like, no, you didn't. And then she takes a gun, and she goes into the hospital, and she ends up shooting an officer. And then she goes and like opens every room, and she finds 11 at the end, and then they take her away. They strap her down, and they inject her, and then they like zap her brain, so she only remembers like 4 events or whatever over and over, and it's like super messed up and sad. And so that's how we find out. And then 11 has like this new understanding. It's like wow, that was all crazy. We obviously have Hopper, who's in like this, not the upside down, maybe like a different part of the upside down, but it's like underground. The upside underground. Hopper comes down, and he's going through, and he's like just going around and doesn't bring any backup or anything. I thought that was kind of weird, but he like voluntarily jumps down, or he falls down, I don't know. But he's going through, and there's like all these slimy things, and he like lights a torch eventually, and it's like prone to fire. And eventually he goes down, and these like slug things like wrap him up like these vines. It covers him up, and we're like, oh dude, Hopper is in trouble. Will like wakes up, like gasps up, and Mike's sitting with him, and he's like, Hopper, he's not well. And he goes over and talks to his mom, and Mike is there, and he's like, Hopper's gonna die. And so they're like, oh shit, we gotta go save Hopper. And so they put the pictures all up around the house. I think they did that last time. And Will draws another one, and he like is like, X marks the spot. This is where Hopper is. And so they have to try to figure out where it is. And they're looking around, and they're like, I don't know. Like, what is this? This doesn't match anything. And then we get Bob, who comes over, and Joyce is like, oh, this is a bad time, Bob. And he's like, Joyce, are you trying to like push me away? And she's like, you know what? I'll just call you later. And he's like, okay. And he like goes over, get to leave. And she's like, wait, Bob. He's like, that's my name. And then Bob comes in, like looks around, and he's like, what is this? Like some kind of game? And they're like, no questions, Bob. Oh, and we need you to find out where this goes. And he's like, Joyce, can I talk to you for a second? He's like, yo, you're not looking well. Will's not looking well. And I'm like, oh my God, dude, it's going to be like another thing with Hopper in season 1 where Joyce was telling him all this stuff. And then they weren't believing Joyce. And then she ended up being right. And Hopper's like, you were right all along. But then Bob goes, wait a minute. I know that place. He's like, that's Lover's Lake. And then he goes, and that's the canyon or whatever. And then he goes, oh my God, this is a map of Hawkins. And then they go, okay, we need to find the X. And then they go through, and it's really cute because they're like measuring stuff, and they're like 21 feet from this to that. And that stuff all was really, really great. And Bob was like the brains of the outfit. And it's like they couldn't get there without Bob. And so now Bob is like brought along, and it's really nice because he's being a useful character. He's not just like this happy-go-lucky guy. And they call him Bob the Brain. And it's like, that's why he's doing it. So that was really cool. Obviously, they go to see Hopper, and they're like, I don't know. It's not like, we don't know where to go. And then Will is like, Mike calls him a super spy. And Will is like, turn right now. And they're like, what? And then they just like turn right. It reminded me of the Office scene where Michael just like, they're following the GPS, and Michael turns right into like a lake or whatever. Hilarious, but obviously different circumstances. But they turn right, and then like right behind Jim's vehicle, and they're like, what's Jim doing here? And then Joyce walks over. There's like the thing covered, the hole is like covered with the slimy things, the vines or whatever. And then Joyce like takes the shovel and like hits it, and she's like, I need you to get down in that hole right now, or help me get down. Bob is like, what? She's like, Bob, I just need you to get me down the hole. And then they both go in there, and he's like, wait, is this Will's map? Are we in Will's map? And then she's like, Hopper, and she's walking around. And he's like, how do you know all this? What's going on? They find Hopper. I don't love how she's like, oh, it's his hand. And everything's like dark down there. And it was weird. They didn't have like a light or anything. So I don't know how they would have possibly found that, and how Hopper survived, because it was like covering his mouth and stuff. But they cut it open, and then he goes, knife. And then Bob goes, oh, it's right over there. And I'm like, wow, dude, how would you know that? Like, again, you don't have a flashlight or anything, but Bob immediately is like, there's the knife. And then they get the knife, and he goes, hand, and he cuts the hand, and then he's like, and he's like, and he's like, takes a second, he's like, hey, Joyce. And then Bob's there, he's like, hey, Bob. He's like, hey, Jim. It's a funny moment, but it was just a little like, took me out of it just like a tiny bit. We get the great scene, guys, where Lucas is telling Max like, hey, and the guy that's like eating the runs of the arcade or whatever, he's like, out of order, you got to go in the back and get a new one. And he's like, okay. And then Lucas is waiting there, and she's like, oh, what do you want, stalker? And he's like, okay, I'm going to tell you everything. And he tells her the whole story. And he's like, yeah, and that's how it was. It feels like it's been forever, but that's what happened. And she's like, okay. She's like, your story was okay, but it could have used a couple things here. And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, the story was okay, but like, this was a little dramatic. And he's like, dude, I didn't make any of that up. That all happened. And she's like, okay. And then she goes out there, and she's like, oh, sure. So I'm sure it was 11 or the Demogorgon, and he's like, dude, shut your mouth. He's like, you're going to get us killed or whatever. He's like, wait, you're being serious? And he's like, yes, the whole time. And so she's like, oh shit. And then Billy picks her up, and then she's like, don't follow me out. And then Lucas is like waiting in the doorway, and she gets in there, and Billy's like, you know what happens when you lie. At the end, of course, Hopper and Bill and Bob down there, and they are like, oh shit. And then there's like all this stuff I talked about, the horror jump scare guys didn't work for me last time, really worked for me this time. They turn around, and there's like a jump scare, and it's like the guy in the suit, but it's like, oh, these aren't the bad guys. They're actually kind of on our side now. There's also a quick scene where they're like, oh, we found debris or whatever. And then they test it, they put a flame underneath it, and everything starts spinning. And that's like how they get back to the scene and show up in the nick of time. The guy's like, he's like, get up there, get in the hole. And like, you think like this is the bad people, but you're like, wait, no. Because Mike and Bill are outside, and like they're kind of keeping guard, and we see the vans pull up, and I was like, oh no. But then I was like, wait, that's from season 1. These guys are good now. So they're working with them. The guy's like, yo, watch out, I got a flamethrower. He starts lighting up the pit, but then this is like destroying Will. And so Will is like seizuring. Whoops, I guess back here behind me. And it's like, man, the dude can't catch a break, man. poor Dustin tells his mom, fakes a story and tells his mom to go out. He like fakes a phone call, and then he's like, they found her out over by this road, and to get her out of the house. And he's like calling everyone. He's like, I got a code red. I got a code red. And then Lucas's sister picks up. And I will say, guys, before I forget this point as well, I mentioned a complaint about season 1 was that we never saw any of the other families. Season 2 rectifies that, dude. We've seen a lot of time with the other families. It's been great. Lucas's sister is my favorite. She's like, I got a code for you. Code shut the heck up. And she like disconnects, and it's really like, oh, it's a cute moment. Dude, that girl, that's a bad bitch in the making right there, let me tell you. Dustin can't get a hold of anyone, can't get a hold of Hopper, and so he's kind of on his own to face off against the Demogorgon. It looked way bigger in the last episode at the end. It really is just like a baby Demogorgon, but still like terrifying. So Dustin sets up a trap where he puts like bologna pieces or whatever all the way back. He's wearing hockey pads. He goes over to the shed, and then he's like looking through the Demogorgon, and then it like looks at him. He's like, oh shit. And he looks back and it's still looking at him. And then he's like, and he's like, you know what? I got to face my fears. And he hits open the door. He's got a hockey stick, and he slap shots it into the open bulkhead. And then he like closes it. And then he's like, sorry, but he ate my cat. And so that was all really cool. And then like just the fact that Dustin has to kind of fend on his own. He can't get a hold of anyone. And the bromance guys that I forgot about for season 2 that we're getting probably next episode, the Steve and Dustin stuff. Dustin goes over and talks to the Wheelers, and they're like, hey, is Mike home? No, Mike's at such and such. Hey, okay, is Nancy here? No, Nancy's at Allie's or whatever. And he's like, son of a bitch. He's like, you're no help. You know that? And they're like, hey, sir, language. And I love the dad. Mr. Wheeler is awesome, dude. He doesn't have a ton of screen time, but he was great in season 1, and he's great in season 2. And he just like doesn't give a shit about anything. He's like, oh my God, dude. But it's just funny that he's like yelling at Dustin for saying like, you son of a bitch. And he's like, you're really no help at all. And it's just funny because Dustin goes away, and then Steve shows up, and he's got flowers, and he's like, I love you. I'm sorry. I love you. I'm sorry. He's like, wait, what am I sorry for? And then Dustin comes over, and he's like, are those flowers for Mr. or Mrs. Wheeler? And he's like, what? No. And then he's like, okay, take it. And he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, Nancy's not home. And he's like, well, where is she? And he's like, I don't know. But he's like, come on. And he's like, you saw the bat you have, that spiked one? He's like, yeah. And he's like, why? And he's like, okay, just come on. I'll explain on the way. He's like, come on, let's go. And he gets in the car, and it's like Dustin, who can't get a hold of anyone else, is like relies on Steve. And it's like, we get this relationship coming up that I completely forgot about. And I was like, yes, dude, Dustin and Steve for the win. So yeah, so that whole sequence, guys, but that I promise is kind of the end of the recap here. Okay, guys, so my Hawkins hero for this one, guys, it's Bob the Brain. I have to admit that Bob won me over in this episode. He was really useful. The plot could not have gone forward. The characters had exhausted all options. They were usually rely on Hopper to be their detective, and Hopper was being strangled by vines, dude. And so to rescue Hopper, they had to get another character, and Bob the Brain came through, and he figured it out. And I love how he's doing the measurements and all that. So Bob, I think, was great. He wasn't overly positive. He was still within character, but he was much more useful this time. And it's kind of like, oh, he's a valuable asset, and we can use him instead of Joyce, who was trying to just be like, you know what, Bob, I'll talk to you later. So I think that was really good. And I think Bob was the best character in this one. Okay, guys, mouth breather for this one. He wasn't in it much, but I'm going to give it to Papa, dude, or Papa's people, at least, because, you know, we get this really depressing, messed up scene of Eleven's mom that Eleven taps into, where it's like she had her baby. They did like a brutal emergency C-section, got the baby out, and then we're like, you know what, man? This baby, I don't know how they knew that Eleven had powers or what was going on there. Maybe they had some tests done. But they separate Eleven's mom from Eleven, and then they just made her brain dead, basically. And I was like, man, that's really messed up, because she went in there and went crazy, and they're like, we need to control this. And it's just really, really sad. And it's like, man, Papa sucks. And it's like, that's why when Eleven compared Hopper to Papa, last time I was like, yo, cool your jets, Eleven. Okay, Hopper ain't no Papa, okay? He's Papa 2.0. But this Papa sucks. And, you know, Matthew Modine, he was the first, his name was the first one that popped up in credits. I was like, dude, I don't know how that happened, but it's like a younger Matthew Modine, of course, or younger Papa. And like, he does a really good job of playing a villain, where it's like, he doesn't say much, but it's just like his face being there. And they're like, no, it's him. And I'm like, yeah, Papa is the main villain. And it's like, don't forget the damage that he's done. And I think he is the mouth breather, or the evil villain, I would say, for this one. Okay, guys, that brings us to the score. Guys, this is a 9-6. This is a damn episode. I mean, this felt like season one. It was really, really good. It was like season one on steroids, really, between the music and the acting and the story arcs and the different plots. And like I said, all the different threads. And we had so many different threads between Nancy and Jonathan go to see Murray and like kind of bringing Murray back into the fold. And now they're kind of working together. And then they're planning to kind of take that down and not just burn the lab down. And then we get Hopper, obviously, kind of who continues to investigate, but he's usually our main hero and he gets kind of taken down. So he needs help. We get more into Will's stuff. Bob plays a great role here. 11 goes to see her mom, and like we get that huge backstory with the rainbows and all that stuff. It's super sad, and there was like a safe there, and she's getting a gun out. But that all worked for me, guys. We get Steve, who's like still in love with Nancy clearly, but then Dustin kind of and him team up there. We'll see where that goes. And then we get Jonathan and Nancy, who just try to rekindle their love there, or kind of wondering what's going on. And it's like Nancy's still interested and kind of wondering what's happening there, just like the rest of us. So that's all really, really good, guys. And I think the Lucas Max stuff is really good. And then Max kind of paying with Billy, where Billy's like, dude, what happens when you lie. And it's like, man, it's too bad, because one episode Billy is like, yo, we're family now, so we got to stick by each other, whatever. But then we know she's not biological family, so it's interesting. And it's like, I hope we get more backstory on that. But yeah, this episode just as a whole, guys, really, really worked for me. And I was just like, man, there's a lot of really good stuff. And then obviously Will basically getting burned alive inside. It's like, how do we get the shadow out of him without hurting Will? And we'll go into that more. But I thought everything was just really, really well done, guys. And I had a blast watching this episode. Okay, guys, well, that's another episode of Talkin Hawkins. Thanks for checking out Project Potter. Appreciate you guys stopping by. These drop every Sunday, guys, so keep an eye out for those. We have a few more episodes left in season 2. Very excited. Things are starting to get a little bit better, and I don't really remember much of season 2. So I do remember loving season 3, but again, I've only seen these one time since they aired, so it's really fun to rewatch with a critical eye. And so, yeah, appreciate you guys. Like, comment, subscribe, and until next time, guys, peace.